It's so funny watching Yale students complain about the privileged. They're in the top 1/10 of 100% of people who've lived in the entire history of the planet, much less just the people that are on the planet now. They're dominating patriarchs in training, right? They're baby representatives of the patriarchy. And all they do is complain about that tiny, tiny, infinitesimal fraction of people who have slightly more than they have now. It's appalling. And their idiot professors pat them on the back and send them out the world to do that instead of teaching them how to live. They damage their mental health. They hurt our society. They're bringing things down, and that's what they're aiming at.
Can we revive the state of Western civilization using the Nietzschean idea that God is dead?
Well, it's the wrong question in some sense, because I think it's too diffuse. To me, the issue more is, do you have problems in your life that you're not addressing that you could solve? And the answer is yes. And it's an easy thing to figure out. You sit on your bed one morning and say, okay, there's some things that need to be done that I don't want to do, that I could do, that would make things better by the end of the day. What are they? Well, your conscience will deliver those suckers in no time flat, man. And then you might have to say, okay, well, how do I entice myself into doing a few of those? And if you ask, instead of trying to force yourself to do it like you're a tyrant and a slave at the same time, you can usually negotiate with yourself so that you'll start to sort those things out. Sort them out. Put your house in order. And then move out. Move on. And out. Yes. That's a Freudian slip, by the way. Yeah.
I don't know how much you know about postmodernist philosophy. You're at Ryerson, so probably quite a bit. But not that the U of T is any better, because it's not. But the postmodernists don't believe in science. There's lots of things they don't believe in. They don't believe in logic. And I'm not making this stuff up. Like, you can go read it for yourself, Derrida in particular. They think that logic is part of the oppressive patriarchy and that there's no point in dialogue because all there is different power groups identified by their groups and they can't really talk. It's just a power struggle. And that's why the radical leftists stop people from speaking on campus. That's why I couldn't find anybody to debate me, roughly speaking, at the University of Toronto. Right. And I went to Queen's University 2 weeks ago to the law school there because I was invited by a group called the Runnymede Association, and they asked 6 professors if they would debate me. It's like, no. So why not? I'm not even a lawyer. And lawyers can debate. Like, they're good at that. That's what they're trained to do. No, they wouldn't debate me. So they had to get somebody to play devil's advocate, and he did a good job. You know, he did a very credible job, I thought. But and you think, well, why wouldn't they come out and debate me? That's easy. They don't believe in dialogue. Period. It's part of the philosophy. Because you have to believe in logic, first of all, to believe in dialogue. You have to believe that people can communicate as individuals, fundamentally, and not that you're just locked in your identity as group member against all the other identity groups that are struggling for power in the kind of Hobbesian landscape. That's all part of postmodernism.
What's the problem with postmodernism? Well, if all value structures have collapsed, then there's nothing to do. Because in order to do something, one thing has to be better than another, because otherwise, why do it? And so people who are ensconced in the postmodern tradition are undermined by their own philosophy. They can deconstruct their own deconstruction, in which case they might as well just sit there and do nothing, which would actually be preferable to what they're doing now. So how do they extract themselves from that dilemma? They do it illogically, but they don't care. Because the postmodernists, first of all, don't believe in logic. That's a reflection of the logos, which they've dispensed with. Dialogue they don't believe in, because that's a reflection of the logos, which they've dispensed with. Logic and dialogue are irrelevant. Well, that does bring up the problem of what to do. Well, the postmodernists finesse that by reverting to the Marxist doctrines from which postmodernism emerged. And so they say, well, yeah, you can't get any direction from postmodernism, but we're not going to worry about that because we don't worry about such things. What we'll do is just use sleight of hand to push forward the communitarian doctrines out of which our original hypothesis emerged. And everyone says, well, we'll turn a blind eye to the paradox because we actually need something to do. And plus, to the degree that we're communitarian, we can take out our nihilistic resentment and arrogance and ingratitude on every single person we deem to have something more than we have. And so if you're wondering why certain values can exist in the absence of any value, you have to look no farther than to understand that people who are desperate and chaotic will still be angry and destructive. And they can manifest that perfectly with the moral mask that says, well, I'm not really after what you have because you have a little more than me. I'm speaking on behalf of these people who have even less. It's absolute nonsense.
It's like science is just a patriarchal, oppressive patriarchal structure. And so we need to reconstitute it from the bottom up. It's like they type on their computers while they say this, not noticing that by the fact that they're using the damn computer, which wouldn't work. You know, people had to figure out quantum mechanics before they could make computers. They use the computer, science isn't real. Tap, 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 tap. It's like they do the same thing when they're in jet planes. Science isn't real. And here I am, 600 miles an hour, typing on my computer. It's like that's called a performative contradiction from a philosophical perspective, and that's the same as a logical paradox. You don't get to say one thing and do another and say that you've got it right. Well, you do if you're a postmodernist, because you can do whatever you want if you're a postmodernist. And the reason the damn postmodernists are Marxists, as far as I can tell, because inevitably they are, is because the problem with postmodernism is it doesn't even leave postmodernists anything to do, because postmodernists don't believe in overarching directional narratives. And the problem with that proposition is, if you don't have an overarching directive narrative for your life, you don't know what to do. And it's really important that you know what to do, because you're alive and you need to do things. Well, we'll just turn back to the original Marxism and we'll say, well, we'll just group ourselves up in oppressed groups and we'll have wars between the oppressed groups. That'll give us a sufficient overarching narrative. It doesn't matter that it contradicts the postmodernist thesis, because they don't care about contradictions. So, if the world is required to validate your identity, you're done for. And the reason for that is that every single one of you have a pathological direction in which you're likely to go. And that's because every temperamental virtue comes with a temperamental vice. And so the only, you think you're sane. It's like you're not. You're not even close. If I put you alone in a cave for 2 weeks, you'd be done. You can't. You can't be sane on your own. And so what happens is that your parents, if they have any sense, train you, roughly speaking, to be vaguely acceptable to other people, and they keep nudging and winking at you every time you're a moron, so that you get nudged into something approximating acceptable. And you're clued in enough to pay attention, so when someone raises an eyebrow or doesn't find your joke funny, or something rather subtle like that, you immediately revise your identity. And we're always nudging and tapping each other non-stop, exchanging information about how to stay sane. And if I'm forced into a position where I have to validate your identity, it's like, what if your identity is wrong? What if it's pathological? What if it doesn't serve you well? And I start validating, you think I'm your friend? I'm not your friend at all. I'm a mirror for your narcissism. And you will disappear and drown. And I see this happening all the time with people. Like, if you're fortunate, you're surrounded by people who like you now and wish you'd be a little better. And they'll let you know when you're failing on that. And then you think, you don't even have to think that much. All you have to do is watch. It's like, is this person like rolling their eyes at? That's a bad one. That predicts divorce, by the way, when you get to eye-rolling stage. That's not good. But basically, you're fortunate that people don't validate your damn identities. Like, what makes you think you've got your identity figured out? You're really complicated, and you're clueless as hell about it, because you can't represent yourself entirely. You're the most complicated thing that exists. How are you going to come up with an accurate definition of your identity? You got 100 people out there helping you out if you've got any sense, if you're vaguely tolerable, and they're kind of hinting at you not only what you are, but what you might become. Man, you should welcome invalidation of your identity. Now, malicious, well, that's a different story, but it's not that easy to separate out accurate criticism, especially if it hits you right where it hurts, which is where you're wrong. You can't separate that out from maliciousness or hate speech. It's like, good luck. Good luck. You never learn anything without pain. And often when you receive a piece of corrective information from someone, It's like if you could throw that person in jail, you would. That doesn't mean they're wrong. So,
Is life so terrible that it shouldn't exist? Well, the answer is, it depends on how you live it. And if your life is so terrible that you can't bear it, then it raises the question of whether or not you're living it properly. And that's not to say that people don't suffer under burdens that are too great for them to bear. They certainly do. It doesn't matter. Because if you let that embitter you, if you let that destroy your allegiance to the proper path, all it does is make that worse and everything else. It's no out. Well, what do you think? The best of all possible worlds will be brought into being by deceit? It seems unlikely. You know that doesn't work in your own life. You tangle yourself up in your own lies, right? One lie breeds 10 and 10 breeds 100, and maybe you put the consequences on down the road and you don't fall into the pit for 5 or 6 years. Maybe you've even forgotten why you fell in when you finally do fall in, but everyone knows that you don't get away with anything. And so the issue is, well, what would happen if you just said what you thought? Stupid as it is, inaccurate as it is, and listen to people, criticize you in response to shape you and make you more articulate. What would your life be like? And the answer to that is, and I know this to be true, I've worked with many, many people on precisely this problem. Your life gets better and better and better and richer and deeper, but that comes with a heavier and heavier burden of responsibility. Well, that's okay. You use the observation of your own capability to bear responsibility, to buttress yourself against the terrors of being finite. You say, weak and miserable as I am, I can still stand up to the terrible tragedy of life and prevail. And that's good enough. Thank you.